Good evening, everybody. Welcome. And I see my friend Rabbi Rachel in the room. She's the one that taught me that song. We stood in front of a factory freezing most of January together, and we
Very
sang
nice.
that song over and over again. It's good to have you all here tonight. We invite you to be sure that you are muted as you enter the Zoom room so that background noise can be kept to a minimum. And I did want to be sure you all knew that this is being recorded, and you will receive a link in a few days, certainly by the end of next week. Once the video has been edited and put up on our YouTube channel, you will get a link. So it is being recorded. I am Jane Field. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Council of Churches. MCC is a nonprofit coalition of 7 mainline Protestant denominations. You can see their logos on the screen. I like to call them the usual suspects. These members, along with our 2 associate member churches, Hope Gateway in Portland and Union Church in Biddeford Pool, represent more than 400 local congregations all around the state of Maine, with more than 50,000 parishioners in their care. The Council's mission is to speak with a prophetic voice of faith in the public square, connecting people within and through and beyond the church to create a more just, compassionate, and peaceful world. One of the ways we fulfill that mission is by offering educational programs like tonight's training. And again, a reminder that it is being recorded and you'll receive a link and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. We'll begin our time together tonight by pausing to acknowledge that the land that our offices are located on, that we now call Maine, is the unceded territory of the Wabanaki Confederacy and their ancestors who lived in right relation with the land for more than 12,000 years before European colonizers arrived. Their Wabanaki descendants live here still, and we remember this and take time to remember this so that the truth might inspire us to take responsibility and to become repairers of the breach. The Maine Council of Churches is a proud member of the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. Will you be in a spirit of prayer with us tonight? Creator God, as we gather, help us to listen compassionately, speak humbly, and act justly. Grant us vision to see the brokenness of the past, ears to hear one another's needs for healing in the present, and courage, patience, wisdom, and hope to work together for the future you dream. Amen. I will stop sharing my screen now. I'm going to change the chat settings so that if you put something in the chat, and we hope you will, and I'll explain what in a minute, only the hosts and co-hosts will see it for most of the lecture this evening. There may be moments when we open it back up, but for the most part, what we want to use it as is a Q&A forum, so that as a question occurs to you for the trainer, you could put that in the chat and the hosts and co-hosts will see it. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, my friend, the Reverend Dr. Jody Hayashida. Jody is the organizer of Multifaith Justice Maine, a statewide movement under the auspices of Maine People's Alliance that builds power across diverse spiritual and religious traditions to work collectively to create a just and radically loving society. Jody is also the Unitarian Universalist representative to the board of the Maine Council of Churches, where she currently serves as a ruling officer, which makes her sound very important indeed. And she is. Toward the end of our time together this evening, Jody is going to lay out some concrete, actionable steps we can take following this training. This is by no means a one and done kind of thing. If that's what you signed up for, surprise, because that's not what it is. But right now, Jody's going to introduce us to the guest trainer, Adam Friedman of Interfaith Alliance. Thanks, Jody.
Thanks, Jane.
And hello, everyone. It is so good to be with you tonight. And it is my true joy and honor to introduce to you Adam Friedman, who is the campaigns director at Interfaith Alliance. Interfaith Alliance is a national group that supports and equips this kind of work on the ground all around the country. And I'm actually going to read to you off of their website just some of their vision statement because I think it says a lot about the ways in which Interfaith Alliance grounds itself in the radically liberatory promise of all faith traditions. The vision of Interfaith Alliance is democracy, not theocracy, which includes work around anti-authoritarianism, healthy boundaries between religion and government, focuses on freedom, not extremism, which means LGBTQ plus freedom, reproductive freedom, actively countering hate, and education, not indoctrination, which focuses on public schools and anti-censorship. This group is an incredibly valuable resource. Jane and I have both benefited from conversation and support from Adam. Adam, it is so good to have you with us. Thank you for taking time tonight to offer this training, and I will turn it right over to you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Jody, for that very kind and thoughtful introduction. And of course, Jane, and to all of you for having me on this evening. Truly, I have the privilege of sharing this training and meeting with folks of faith from across the United States. And every time I have the privilege of seeing faces like yours in person or virtually on Zoom, it reminds me that we are not alone in this movement for democracy, and we are surrounded by people who have faith in the promise of our democracy. And so, with that, I'm going to share some slides with you. And oh, did that work? Fantastic. Uh, so, as you've heard, tonight we'll be talking about democracy, not theocracy. And what that means is we're going to be talking about some terms many of you are familiar with, many of you use. And I want to just say up front, we will be defining tonight, so you are familiar with the language we use to define them. Um, I also just want to name before we jump in that there is such a need right now. I know many of you are leaning in, a need for all of us to stand up and take a first step, right? Even though in this moment, what we're seeing, not just nationally, but at home in our communities, can feel paralyzing. I know I often feel that way. Our job is not to achieve democracy as individuals. By the nature of our work and by the nature of what we are fighting for or aiming to achieve, we are doing this in community, and our job is only to start. And so, with that, I want to jump in and share just a little bit more about Interfaith Alliance. As Reverend Jody so expertly shared, we are a network of people of diverse faiths and beliefs across the United States in all 50 states. I was in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago with our affiliate there, working centrally to build a resilient democracy. We know that the promise of true religious freedom and civil rights in the United States has never been achieved. And our job centrally as people of faith is to strive for that promise of democracy and all that uh, comes with that notion to be actualized on this land. And so I also briefly want to mention before I jump in that we've been around. We've been doing this for a while. I'm grateful to be a part of a 32-year-old organization that was founded in 1994 to counter the rise of what was then understood as the Christian coalition, and we now more broadly define as white Christian nationalism. In those over 3 decades since, we have really risen to what we understand as the challenge in this moment, not just countering white Christian nationalism, but leading with a positive vision of pluralistic, multiracial democracy. And so, with that, we're going to jump in. Um, and again, we'll be talking about authoritarianism, white Christian nationalism, some other challenging topics tonight, and I appreciate you leaning in with me. So, central to our understanding of authoritarianism are four core ideas, right? This is not comprehensive, but we're going to be lifting up these elements in particular this evening. And so I want to start out by defining some of these. Right? We know that authoritarianism is a concentration of power, right? We talk about consolidation often, and erosion of checks and balances, which is something we're seeing very actively in our country. We also know that it's a system, not just a person, right? I know for many of us, there's an almost uh, spiritual response to an individual. I'll say that in this nonpartisan space. And we know that in order for an authoritarian agenda to be implemented, it takes a whole group of people, and it also takes a broad permission structure to be implemented, right? We know that the moment we have found ourselves in has been in the making for years and years, and now we are seeing the rapid culmination of that multi-year project. And we know that since the very start of our country, right, we are observing 250 years without a king this year, and we know that even in our country's founding, um, racism and white supremacy played a central role and continue to inform this moment. We also know that this is a global issue. 73% of people inhabiting our planet are currently living under some sort of competitive authoritarianism, which is a statistic that has only increased over the past few years. Right? And I was shocked when I heard that number, but that feeling that, this is happening in the US and around the world is real, right? You can see here some images of folks we understand to be uh, kind of spreading this authoritarian ideology, meeting with each other. And the reason why we think it's so important to talk about this issue, not just in the context of the US, but understand that this is happening around the world, is because uh, the challenge we face, again, not, people who have democratically elected any of the folks you see on the screen, but the ideology itself is something that is transnational, and folks who are spreading it are connected with one another and strategizing together. And while that is a challenging truth to feel, to internalize, I hope that the flip side of it can be something inspiring, that in every country, where there is this competitive authoritarianism, which we'll define in a little, there are robust and multi-pillar, uh, especially grounded in communities of faith, movements for democracy, and we are also connected with those folks. Our work to fight against theocracy in the United States, to support democracy, is a collective effort that connects us to citizens of every country on earth. And so I also just want to identify, I know we talk about authoritarianism or fascism, or there are a lot of terms we might hear in the media, on Facebook, right? And I want to name some of the characteristics, the manifestations we're seeing in the United States, because I think it's important for us to be specific and talk about the things that are exceptional, right? We are holding two truths in this moment, both that the United States has never been a true democracy, and it's something that we continue to strive for. And we are seeing an unprecedented slide toward authoritarianism. And to distinguish between those two truths, it's important for us to have this toolkit of behaviors, right, as to how authoritarianism is manifesting. And so I know I believe you can message the presenter as I read these off, if you can think of examples of any of these, and I know everyone can think of examples for all of these, feel free to message them to us so I can read some of them out. All right, investigations against critics. Is that something that folks have seen? Any investigations against critics? I know just recently there were some lawmakers who were acquitted, right? But were making videos telling folks in the military not to obey unlawful orders, deploying the military domestically. Has anyone on this call seen that? I can say here in Washington, D.C., where I'm calling in from, there are still National Guards members outside of my apartment every day. Give license to law breaking. We all saw January 6th unfold on television, and we saw folks get pardoned, right? Giving that license to them, right? Regulatory retaliation, we've seen how the FCC, the FEC, other regulatory bodies have been weaponized against people that don't support or go along with an authoritarian agenda. A huge shift of wealth to families and elites. That crony capitalism is language you might be familiar with. Unequal enforcement, right? Punishing some folks for behavior that's unlawful, but letting it slide for others. The autocrat won't leave. Certainly something that we've seen shared under the guise of a joke, right? I see some examples here. Trump's attacks on Governor Mills in the state of Maine, absolutely, right? And of that, those direct attacks on people who don't fit in with a political agenda, ICE not following due process, absolutely giving a license to lawbreaking, and that's also, deploying enforcement agents kind of just unfairly or unlawfully. Um, Attacks on U.S. aid, absolutely. The takeover of the CDC, right? And that also, in a way, is regulatory retaliation against people who support science and scientists in our country. Um, and let's see, judicial branch capture, right? Putting pressure on judges to make rulings that are not in line with legal precedent. And we've seen a lot of intimidation against judges around the country. And so we're seeing this happen. And something that is a little bit less widely discussed in mainstream culture is the role that Christian nationalism, and in particular white Christian nationalism, plays. So briefly, before getting into how Christian nationalism is manifesting in this moment, I just want to get into a multi-part definition that we use at Interfaith Alliance, right? Christian nationalism is a cultural framework, and its goal is to kind of conflate American identity with a very exclusive form of religious identity, a form of religious identity that is incredibly narrow, not only in who practices it, but who is favored by it or who can be a part of it. Right? It's also rooted in this myth that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and enjoys a special favor from God, is this city on a hill that the world should look up to. And I'll put this in quotes. Our job as good Christians is to share uh, the US's divinity with the world around it. Right? There's also this intention to kind of merge this narrow view of religious practice, often kind of an abuse of theology with our civic life to the detriment of both. And finally, it's inherently anti-democratic and is rooted in, I'll read some of these isms: white supremacy, nativism, patriarchy, and authoritarianism, and really focuses on shifting power away from the people and into the hands of a very narrow group that is favored by all of these isms, right? Straight, white, Christian men who have certain political views and practice a very, very specific type of Christianity, right? So even within the worldview of white Christian nationalists in the United States, most Christians are not true Christians. So how is this used by authoritarians? Why are we talking about it tonight? Well, we're seeing around the world, and especially in the United States, that authoritarians and autocrats often will invoke a certain type, this narrow type of religion, in order to justify their agenda, right? Kind of claiming this divine ordination in order to justify an agenda that's otherwise deeply inhumane and cruel. They do this through not only religious language, of the wolf in sheep's clothing in a very literal sense, right? But using religious symbols, language, alluding in whatever way they can to this notion that they have some sort of divine mandate to carry out their agenda. We also see the invocation of what I'll again put in quotes as traditional values by autocrats, authoritarians, with the understanding that if they're making direct appeals to a specific value set that's held disproportionately by conservative religious folks, even if they are in their behavior completely at odds with religious values otherwise, they can bring those folks on their side. And finally, again, this is not exhaustive, but really want to lift up kind of what we're seeing in the United States. We often see religious based scapegoating as central to the way autocrats, authoritarians consolidate and maintain power. Right. So one example is from Hungary. Their Prime Minister Viktor Orban will weaponize Christian values and even scripture to justify very xenophobic anti-immigrant policies, and we're seeing that in the United States too. Right. I have two examples here that, and I'm sorry we even have to talk about these things, but it's important because our government is tweeting these out. Right. Both of these posts are two amongst dozens and dozens that the Department of Homeland Security has shared from their social media accounts over the past year. The one on the left of your screen reads, "The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion," from Proverbs 28:1. Right. This kind of line from Proverbs was superimposed on a video of an ICE raid, literally conveying this message that ICE cruelty is righteous and is divinely ordained. And in the same vein, on the right of your screen, you see uh, the post of a painting that was done over 100 years ago during a period of westward expansion. If folks in school learned about, the hand of God, um, some of these ideas around the divine right of especially European descendants to move westward and take over land, commit ethnic cleansing against indigenous folks, right? This was a picture that was shared from DHS social media and the White House with the caption, "A heritage to be proud of, a homeland worth defending," directly invoking the themes that you see here, right? Where on one side of this image, you see a literal light background, and on the other side, dark. On that light background, you see things like trains, ships, white people who we know are descendants of European Christians. And on the left, you see indigenous people, you see rugged mountains, literal darkness in that top right or top left corner, and buffalo in the background, right? And then you see this kind of angelic figure laying out telegraph wire holding a Bible, right? This in an image conveys the doctrine that is being invoked by the administration and again, this is not partisan. This is what they're sharing from their own social media accounts. And we're just reflecting the facts here, right? This is an ideology they're sharing to demonstrate that they believe God is on their side. And the actions that they're taking, especially that ICE is taking in our country, are divinely ordained. Why are they using this language? Why are they taking this approach? Well, there is a researcher who's out of Montana State, does really phenomenal work, who did some research in 2024 ahead of the election and found that there were three factors, three kinds of ideas, creating a unique sense of urgency amongst this population of white Christian nationalists in the United States. And we'll get into some of these statistics in a little, but I just want to mention that when we name white Christian nationalists, roughly one-third of Americans, of people in this country, are adherents or sympathizers with this idea of white Christian nationalism, which is a staggering statistic. And the good news is that over two-thirds of people who live on this land are on the team that we're on to, on Team Interfaith, on Team Democracy, right? We vastly outnumber these white Christian nationalist adherents and sympathizers, right? So I want to break down these elements of kind of what underlies the sense of urgency behind white Christian nationalists and how they're organizing. So we understand how to deconstruct it, right? This first element is divine mandate. The idea, as I've referenced, that God kind of divinely founded the United States for white Christian Europeans, and therefore the United States' actions are divinely ordained, are brokered by God, and in turn, the role of every good American and every good Christian is to promote this narrow view of Christianity domestically and globally. So how do people feel about this? You can see these numbers for yourself, right? Out of all Americans, this is a minority of folks, but amongst people who believe in, who support Christian nationalist ideology, we're looking at over 83% of adherence adherence. We're looking at around 67% of sympathizers. And we know, being part of the skeptics and rejectors and of group here on this call, that the vast majority of both skeptics and rejectors reject this idea that God, as you can see here, this was the language in the survey, God intended America to be a new promised land where European Christians could create a society that could be an example to the rest of the world, right? We know that um, in its founding, the United States was not a nation specifically for white Christian people. We also know that white Christian nationalism centrally animates white supremacy for its end goals, right? Um, White Christian nationalism has historically and is still used to justify the subjugation of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks, as we just saw from those tweets from the Department of Homeland Security. And as we know from our history books, at least the ones where in states where we can still say this or still have it represented, that um, even during the time of slavery, uh, scripture was abused or misappropriated to justify the subjugation of other people. And we also see how leaders in the public square increasingly are endorsing white supremacy and Christian nationalism, which create a sense of urgency and support for political violence. Right? And what this can look like tangibly is folks talking about how immigrants, especially immigrants from Central South America and West Africa, are coming to the United States to replace white people, and it's being facilitated by Jews, right? This is a conspiracy theory called Great Replacement Theory. And you're going to hear this, you've probably already heard of this, you'll hear it more and more as we approach the election, because it's a talking point that folks use to justify, for example, voter ID laws, or this idea that we need to secure our elections from this threat that's coming, right? When you hear that language, it's a direct invocation of white Christian nationalist ideology. And then this last kind of element of white Christian nationalist ideology that we're seeing create a sense of urgency right now is end times rhetoric. This idea that not only does the US have this divine mandate, enjoy the favor of God, but people will lose it unless they act with urgency and do whatever it takes to avoid the end times, to avoid apocalypse, to avoid oblivion. We see this from politicians, from celebrities who will literally quote scripture. Some have referenced adorning ourselves as soldiers of God with armor, to basically go out into the streets and take action on behalf of a God who will look unfavorably upon political change, right? It's this idea that there is some sort of abstract but deeply consequential result of losing an election, of not supporting a specific candidate, right? The direct conflation of a very narrow understanding of religion and politics. And we know that these three elements of Christian nationalism, and especially this last one, come together to not only create the sense of urgency, but frankly, support for the possibility of political violence, understanding it as something that might be necessary. And this is the point in my slides where I always pause and say, this is very depressing. I know we are living in a moment that is also very hard. Um, I have one more hard slide, and then the rest of my presentation is full of the amazing work that y'all are already doing that we get to do together, and I promise will be a lot more hardening. And with that, we're going to talk about the New Apostolic Reformation and Seven Mountains theology, my last depressing slide. So, and this one is a little interactive too, but if as I kind of share a little bit more about what white Christian nationalist ideology looks like in the United States, some ways it's manifesting, If this language, if this graphic even is something familiar to you, let us know. You can message us in the chat. I'm curious to hear if folks are familiar with this, if this resonates. But the image you see in front of you is taken from one of the central books used by the New Apostolic Reformation, which is a dominionist denomination of Christians that was started in the United States and exists around the world, built around this theology, Seven Mountains theology, which essentially says that there are seven mountains of society, and it is the role of every good Christian to claim dominion over them, right? We know that there are folks in high positions in politics and other areas of civic life today who adhere to this ideology. It's important to mention that the person who committed unspeakable acts of violence in Minnesota, assassinating an elected official recently, was a member of the New Apostolic Reformation, went to a Bible school hosted by the New Apostolic Reformation, and at its core, this ideology kind of creates this sense of urgency where by any means, we need to assert dominion over these pillars, over these mountains, right? You can see the names of these different kind of mountains below here and see kind of how those manifest for followers of this ideology. And yeah, I'm seeing a lot of folks in the chat saying that they are familiar, they've read about this. I'll say to speak to Jane's message in the chat and keep it nonpartisan. They're actually one of the main authors of Project 2025 is somebody who believes, subscribes to the Seven Mountains theology, um, is a strong dominionist, and is now in the White House running a major part of the administration, right? So we know in this moment that folks who are adherents or supporters of this ideology are in a position of power. Something in my analysis I do want to make central too is that this approach, identifying different parts of society and saying we need to infiltrate them, we need to bring our white Christian nationalist ideology to them, is not only theology, bad theology, mind you, but it's an organizing tactic. And I name that centrally because understanding how folks who are spreading this very kind of narrow supremacist viewpoint is essential in understanding how we can stand up and say the majority of people who live on this land disagree, and we are going to hold firm in each of these areas of society and stand true to our values of welcoming the stranger, of loving our neighbor, right? How do we do that tangibly? Right? This is not just how we stop attacks on democracies, our democracy, but also how we stand up to white Christian nationalism. So, in analyzing 35 cases of attacks on democracies from 1991 to 2021, a 30-year period, two really amazing experts I'm lucky to work with founded that there's a stark difference in the success of opposition to these attacks on democracies or pro-democratic efforts. There's a stark difference in their success based on whether there's a civil resistance movement or not. Right? We can see on the screen how stark that is. There's a 7.5% success rate, and we understand success as either moving into some sort of new democratic era or facilitating a U-turn, which is not going back to what was, but um, going back to a more democratic norm and then instituting stronger democratic protections or reforms, right? When there's a civil resistance movement over these last 30 years, 51.7% of the time, we've seen that success, right? What that means is that more often than not, with a civil resistance movement, team democracy succeeds. So, what is a civil resistance movement? What is people power, right? It's at its core this kind of struggle for, and I'll just name them political, economic, or social objectives. I would add an element of spirituality to this, right? Often moral or spiritual objectives as well, without the use or threat of nonviolence centrally, right? And I'll just name that I'll get questions about this, especially from folks my age. I'm a member of Gen Z who will say, I believe in nonviolence, but it feels like there's this urgency, and I understand why people would respond violently. And I'll just name I can deeply empathize with that. And the research shows that in that same study, in fact, over the past 30 or so years, civil resistance movements that were violent were half as effective in achieving that U-turn as ones that were strictly nonviolent. Were half as effective in terms of the amount of time it took to get a U-turn, and were half as effective in achieving that goal of democracy entirely. And so, aside from the deep moral reasons for nonviolence, there is also a deeply pragmatic one. So just mention in the chat. I'd love to shout a few out. I know all of you have seen this, and there are so many amazing examples of what organized civil resistance looks like in Maine. I just want to ground us in some of them before continuing to read. And I'll name, we'll get into some of them later. But in continuing to talk over the past few weeks and months with our two amazing host organizations, I've heard about all of the incredible organizing work happening in front of jails and detention centers where folks detained by ICE are being held. Jane, I see you mentioning arrests of clergy in Susan Collins' office. No King's gatherings, absolutely, March 28th. No Kings 3. Indivisible Mid-Maine's protest work in Central Maine, absolutely. Even in 400 population small community, we have weekly protest gathering. Incredible, right? Shouting out some fantastic organizations, different movements doing great work, volunteers helping immigrants, right? There is so much incredible work happening. I want to affirm so centrally, not just up in front in ways that are visible to all of us on this call, but also behind the scenes. Right now, why is that behind the scenes work so central? Some of you might have seen this quote before, but I really want to lift up the words of Gene Sharp here, who kind of introduced this theory I'll talk through on the next slide, that by themselves, rulers cannot collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, keep markets supplied with food, make steel, build rockets, train the police and army, issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow, right? People provide these services to the ruler through a variety of organizations and institutions. If people would stop providing these skills, the ruler could not rule. So what does that mean? Right? Central to our job in this moment as people of faith is to say no, right? To draw a line in the sand when the affronts to our morals that we are experiencing every day, cross a line, and we have to say enough. And so I just briefly want to talk through this graphic here, and I also want to make sure I'm not going to go over on time here. Great. So um, on the left of your screen, you'll see this is a kind of representation of how power is structured in an authoritarian regime, right? You see the government exists kind of at the top. You'll notice there is no foundation because there is no reliance on people power. And what the government relies on to be supported, or as Gene Sharp on that last slide told us, to kind of facilitate its agenda, are these pillars of society, right? These are just some examples of what these pillars can look like, right? The civil service, police and military, unions, religion, very centrally. Some other examples are the media, the legal system, lawyers and judges. And our role as people of faith within our houses of worship is to kind of challenge that power structure, right? Make it so that our pillars are not reliable for the government, right? We are not going to go along with an authoritarian agenda. And so what this looks like tangibly, to use an example that some folks might be familiar with, is, we've all heard of how the government last year handed down these tariffs, right? This directive to implement tariffs. That wasn't just the government, those folks at the top of your screen here of this graphic saying, we're doing tariffs, snapping their fingers and it happening. What that required was thousands and thousands of folks in the civil service pillar to do what their jobs historically have been and stamp paperwork, send emails, right? Do all of these things to facilitate that agenda. And what wasn't a story that isn't often told, but happened across the civil service was folks saying no, or working more slowly, or taking different kinds of actions to kind of gum up the works, knowing that this was an illegal action, as we saw the Supreme Court struck down in multiple instances now, right? Our directive is the same. When there is a directive from a government that is crossing a line from democratic norms into authoritarian behavior that invokes religion to lay out an agenda that is cruel and unjust, our role as people of faith is to stand up and say no, to say that is not my religious tradition, to contest it along the lines of our faith, right? And this is not just something that is an imperative in this moment. This is a deeply American tradition that is just as much a part of the fabric of our country as it's ever been, right? Oftentimes people think back to the civil rights movement, which is absolutely correct, in thinking about those moments when people of faith have stood up, gotten into the streets, and dissented publicly. And I want to remind folks that all the way back to the abolitionist movement, there were people of faith who were traveling the country preaching about the immoral imperative to free slaves and why it was a deeply unjust system, right? We know that in the very foundation of our country, the fabric of our country's history, is woven the stories of people of faith saying no. Now, we're also a unique pillar in that when we gather on well, whatever day you gather, whether it's Sunday or Friday or Saturday or any day of the week to pray with your community, you're not just gathering as a faith pillar. You're gathering as people who might be members of the civil service or members of unions, business leaders, lawyers or judges, people in the media, police officers, veterans, right? We are folks who will gather in our houses of worship and come together as a faith pillar, but return to work the next day, to our business over the weekend, and be a part of all sorts of other pillars, right, that have a central role to play in this strategy of saying no. And that means two things. One, that what we talk about in calls like this in our interfaith community and in our houses of worship is something that is shared across society, across these pillars. And if we're showing up and saying no as a union member, right, if we're striking because of something unjust that's happening, we're also doing it as a person of faith. Last night, I had the privilege of leading a training for No Kings, where I talked about how when folks, I know some of you on this call will be there, show up on March 28th, we are not just saying no to kings, yes to democracy. We are doing that as people of faith, right? Who make up the vast, rich tapestry of democracy that makes America what it is, right? And by doing that, by showing up as our full selves in these moments, we are creating a microcosm of the democracy we are working to try and achieve across our country. So the kind of central question, right, is how we can influence these pillars individually, collectively. We also know, as we looked at when we talked about the New Apostolic Reformation and Seven Mountains theology, that faith actors can prop up these pillars, right? Can also infiltrate these pillars and bring a dominionist ideology, a white Christian nationalist ideology to them. So what can we do to shift them? What can we do to try and make them unreliable for the aims of an authoritarian? We're talking tactics, people. So there are a few things we can do, right? I want to introduce a few frameworks, and I'll say that there's going to be a lot of information here. We can also send these slides out. All this information is available on our website. You can go through this deck, and I also have some great resources I can send to Jane as well, like a list of 198 examples instead of the 20 you see on your screen. But I just want to introduce first two types of collective action of what we do as a community, right? One is constructive engagement, the work of educating, of sharing out the kind of frameworks that we know will carry us through this moment broadly. And that part of that is as people of faith, right? Speaking truth to power in our congregations. So it is shared across these pillars as folks kind of leave that space and return to their jobs or the other ways they show up in society. And this can look like a lot of things, right? It can look like a sermon, but it can also look like a small group salon, a town hall. It can look like behind the scenes dialogue or advocacy. And the other side of this is institutional defense, right? To protect our current institutions um, by ensuring that what is working well continues to happen, and what could be better is strengthened, right? We lean in internally to make the institutions we're a part of even stronger. And so that can look like elections, especially at the local level, right? Leaning in and participating to try and build representative democracy that truly represents the people. It can look like policy advocacy, right? Pushing within the system for policies that are just and represent our traditions, our beliefs. It can look like sharing trusted and accurate information, especially about the election, knowing midterms are coming up, right? And there are a number of ways to kind of facilitate the other side of this, right? So that's kind of the work of protecting as a collective, right? And sharing ideas. There's also the work of pushing that we need to do, civil resistance. So what does that look like? Well, we divide this up into three kinds of categories and a lot of different modes, right? There are symbolic actions, which is a great way to raise public awareness, to put social pressure on actors that we know are facilitating an authoritarian agenda or um, proponents of white Christian nationalism. And this can look like marches, rallies, vigils. It can look like letter writing campaigns, like mock award ceremonies. We can get creative with it, right? Mock elections, picketing, all sorts of different modes. We also know centrally alternative cooperation is really important, right? If there are institutions or systems in our country that are not serving the people, part of what our job is to dream of something better and start building it, right? We don't need to wait, nor have we ever, as the American people, for our democracy to be perfect in order to build something that feels closer to what a democracy should be in our communities. And so that can look like a lot of different things, right? It can look like mutual aid, or another way to say this sometimes is like a buy nothing Facebook group, right? Making sure people have what they need in a way that meets the community where they are. And then this third kind of approach or tactic is non-cooperation. And that's what Gene Sharp talked about in his quote, right? It's the idea that we can, through a tactic, an action, a form of organizing, kind of focus on the system of power itself and take away its ability for it to do something that is deeply unjust. One example that I love to point out because it's very doable and it's something that even some friends of mine did was back when there was a horrible focus on bathroom bills and on making, all gender bathrooms illegal. There were folks who were going around putting those signs back up when they were taking them down, right? Literally not cooperating with this directive and saying, well, this is unjust. And I'm not going to just protest about it, which is important in raising awareness and in creating social pressure. I'm just going to change it, right? And this is also, for example, how, especially for folks who are in unions, understand things like strikes or boycotts kind of directly take away the people power needed to facilitate something. Right? So, kind of simply define non-cooperation as the act of refusing to cooperate or comply with requests, demands, or orders. Right? What this can look like in our context is, say, we've seen in other countries how clergy and other leaders have been told they have to sign some sort of loyalty pledge, right? saying, no, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do that, but I'm not going to use my name. I'm going to misspell it and say something else, whatever that looks like, right? That kind of non-cooperation is like a very tangible thing that we might need to lean into in the coming years, right? Um, I want to give some other examples, right? And really couch them in what faith does best, right? So we know that as people of faith, we have a unique role to play in this movement for democracy and against white Christian nationalism. And we have, a history, a track record of success in being the moral backbone of our movements. Right? We know that we bring a certain invocation of our traditions, an assertion of morality and nonviolence when we show up, especially recognizably as people of faith, which can look like holding signs or wearing shirts from our churches or houses of worship, wearing collars, tali tote, right? When we are clergy, um, we also, as people of faith, have a long legacy of doing organizing and training in the United States. So many famous photos, right, we can think about of those church basement trainings during the civil rights movement. And we're continuing in that legacy by using the technology we have today to train as a community of faith. We also are great at providing resources, mutual aid, sanctuary, to mitigate repression, right? To address the threat of repression. And so that looks like sanctuary congregations, right? We know that some denominations from across the country came together to sue the administration over their policy of saying that ICE could go into sensitive locations, including houses of worship, to detain people who ICE was investigating or had an order to arrest. Right? We know that we also have power by invoking our traditions, often through rituals or symbols that are sacred to us. Right? Building demonstrations around holidays is an important example of this. We are uniquely good at building bridges across lines of difference, right? Not just in an interfaith context, but across political divides, across ideological divides, knowing that we as a collective believe in something greater and have a deep tradition that roots us in the values of humanity, even when we might disagree with people. And finally, non-cooperation, right? We know that throughout American history, faith leaders, clergy, laity have been on the front lines of these movements, right? Saying no and taking very direct action. And so I just want to quickly give a few examples of what this has looked like around the country and around the world, right? Famously, and I know Bishop Buddy is an exciting figure, especially right now in Maine. But famously last year, Bishop Buddy um, looked President Trump in the face and made a plea to him, right, for him to show mercy to trans kids, LGBTQ kids, right, and their families, right? Not yelling, but frankly, in a somewhat meek way, right? Making this appeal in the tradition of our faiths. We know that in the United States, as I mentioned earlier, there's a deep tradition of especially Black churches and meeting houses providing this critical organizing infrastructure, convening folks for trainings and meetings, but also running things like meal trains and providing safe places for folks to stay. Um, Another example of this, which comes from a country that has seen, different manifestations of authoritarianism, is in Chile, where a religious institution provided kind of immediate services for folks, legal services, healthcare, employment opportunities, and also documented human rights abuses, right? And we've seen how religious institutions around the world have even welcomed folks into their doors who are experiencing these direct attacks or repression as political refugees, right? In a way, providing that sanctuary, that safety for them. There are also two great examples here, but I definitely want to lift up the one from Maine. We know that last year, and this work continues in other places in the state, how we saw how interfaith communities showed up outside Cumberland County Jail, right, for multiple days, bearing witness, holding vigils, in protest of ICE, but also in solidarity with folks, human beings who are being detained, many of whom are still in ICE detention. We also see, again, bridge building as a central strength of our communities. This is an example of folks in Zambia in 2021, who, again, we're in solidarity with by the virtue of being on Team Democracy, where, and when you hear these different denominations coming together, I think you'll understand how big of a deal this is. They were able to bring together Catholics, Protestants, and Pentecostals to form a broad front to push back against their elected leaders' attempts to manipulate the Constitution and run undemocratically for a third term. Right. And then finally, I want to lift up non-cooperation. There are a lot of amazing examples of how faith communities, especially in an interfaith context in the United States, have done this work of non-cooperating. And these two most recent ones from last year, I just want to emphasize. One, because the Target boycott is ongoing. This effort led especially from folks in the Black church to boycott, not shop at Target for decisions they made to kind of step away from the values that they purported to hold previously, especially around affirming the value of Black lives. And then finally, oh, and I'll mention, this is expanded. We've seen a lot of direct action around this Target boycott in states across the country, but especially in Minneapolis in the past few weeks. And lastly, I'll just mention how we saw three different denominations in the past few weeks have their boycott against Avelo Airlines, which has been contracting with ICE to run deportation flights. We saw this pay off and Avelo end their contract with ICE. They're no longer running these flights. Right. Uh, what all of these examples have in common is people of faith leaning into what we do best, right? Knowing that we all have that muscle of coming together, bringing food to our house of worship, running some sort of clothing drive to provide for folks in our community who are in need. And we can expand that, right, in this moment of deeper need to ensure that we are providing the resources and support to folks who need it because we're facing these attacks on our democracy. Knowing that, we can have conversations with folks across lines of difference in ways that not everyone can. And in this moment, we need to dig deeper, have more of those conversations with folks we might not see eye to eye to on different issues, but we know are just as troubled by the cruelty we are seeing in this very top-down way in our country, and we want to bring them on Team Democracy. And central to all of these stories are four imperatives that I want to leave you with tonight. Right? We protect people, we disrupt and disobey when we are faced with injustice and cruelty. We defend the civic institutions that we know need to be strengthened and will maintain our democracy. And we need to build the alternatives that create a democracy that we have never truly achieved in this country, built on the dreams we have for what liberation truly is. And so I know we're short on time here. I won't get into these slides, but do I have 5 minutes, Jane? Okay, I'll quickly run through this. This is a really important thing I want to lift up. We've started adding this since the murders of two American citizens in Minneapolis because it's an important kind of way for us to understand the tactics of the authoritarian government and be able to respond with tried and true approaches. This is taken from the HOPE curriculum. You can request a full 90-minute training from them too by going to endpoliticalviolence.org. But I want to quickly run through these tactics, right? This is something we include in the training that kind of goes over how we make political violence and repression backfire, right? And as I go through these, I encourage you to think about how, as people of faith, we have a unique role in doing this, right? So this first slide is kind of how authoritarian governments and people that are perpetuating political violence devalue and even erase the victims and survivors of this violence. Right, first, we see folks covering up the injustice, saying, oh, that didn't happen. That was AI, right? You actually can't see the person's hand. the ICE officer was in front of them, and so you can't tell,
He somehow
right?
muted the entire thing.
Devaluing the target or victim, right? Um, she was actually trying to hit the ICE agent. We're going to investigate her wife, right? Because she's a terrorist. Reinterpreting what happened in their favor. Oh, he brought a concealed weapon. He was going to try and kill ICE officers. Hijacking official channels to give a false sense of due process. Look, we're not going to unpack this now. This is actually something that Bavino said, after the murder of Alex Preddy. We're not unpacking this right now. We're waiting for a formal investigation to conclude. Um, and intimidating or bribing, right? Uh, we're going to investigate. Um, the other folks on the scenes, the folks that were filming this. We are going to label them all as terrorists, right? And I want to name that this slide deck existed long before the violence that we saw in Minneapolis. In fact, the example that we were using for the few years before this was of the of Bloody Sunday in Selma, of the way in which organizers during the civil rights movement saw their family members and friends being beaten, often by police, away from the cameras in these small settings, and said, well, we need to come up with a strategy here to disrupt this, to speak truth, because we have to make this political violence backfire. Right? Um, so I'm going to talk about kind of what we do in just a moment, but I want to name that these also come in cycles. These moments come in cycles. I think we all felt, um, during this period when Minneapolis was kind of front and center in the news, that there was this heightened tension in the country. And then I know for some of us, we felt that subside. Of course, Maine very quickly was thrust into that national spotlight, saw a lot more of these raids, and was kind of next in this cycle of attack. And over time, we can kind of monitor these cycles. And as I know that y'all have continued to do, be able to be proactive in planning. And so, kind of what our role is when we see political violence happen is very quickly leaning into these 5 steps, right? Revealing, exposing the injustice. And I want to mention a really amazing campaign that was organized by people of faith and clergy in Minneapolis after the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, where they asked clergy from around the country to watch the videos and just say what they saw happen, not speak to how they felt about it, not speak to the political implications, but just say, I saw this thing happen, right? Expose the injustice, validate the target, right? This person was a mom. This person was a partner, a wife, or a husband. This person was a teacher, was a doctor, was a caretaker. Make sure we are interpreting the events as an injustice, right? No person should be gunned down in the street by their government, right? No person should fear for their lives when exercising their First Amendment rights, right? We also redirect, we mobilize support to not rely on official channels that might be hijacked, which kind of goes back to that example of clergy being the ones to share this true and trusted information. And we know that clergy are actually one of the 5 most trusted messengers in the United States by people across the aisle, right? And so clergy, along with folks like election administrators, teachers, depending on the state, um, veterans are in that group too, have a unique role to play in sharing trusted information and making sure that people are not falling victim to things like AI and untrue stories we're seeing being shared on social media and even from official channels. And then lastly, resisting intimidation and bribes, right? Saying, okay, this person is, a good example of this is in Minnesota. Saying, okay, you're demanding that these prosecutors investigate the wife of Renee Good. Well, 6 of them just resigned. They're resisting that intimidation. They're not going to lean into that. And they have, popular support of the people standing behind them. Right. So there are a few different ways we can understand kind of the backfire element as it maps onto the cycles that I mentioned before, and broadly the preparation that we can do in advance, knowing that the unfortunate reality is we might see political violence happen again in our country, the best thing we can do is be prepared, right? Recruit folks, make sure that they're on team democracy, on the team of folks who believe in the free expression of our faiths and diverse beliefs. Make sure that folks are trained up and have the skills needed to rise to the moment, like y'all are doing this evening. And then kind of chip away at the support, right? Have the hard conversations with folks in our community. Say, I can respect your viewpoint, but what about this? What about the cruelty? Like, what do you think Jesus would say about this? Right? Ask them the really hard questions. Confront them uh, with the same things that we are confronted with every day. And so lastly, you know what? We don't have a lot of time. I'll skip that one. Lastly, I just want to end with some resources. All right. There's a lot of continued learning to be done. I know that Reverend Jody is going to talk about some incredible opportunities coming up in Maine to continue this work, to plug in more. And I just want to mention some amazing national resources put together by different experts that are a series of toolkits made in partnership with different faith organizations and Protect Democracy on kind of different elements of the work we're engaged in and the work ahead. And with that, I know I'm over time. I just want to close by saying one thing, that we are not only stronger than authoritarianism and white Christian nationalism because we are in the majority, right? We are not only stronger because we have a deep well of spiritual resiliency and thousands of years of tradition on our side. We are stronger because our values teach us to lean into the power of interfaith relationship, right? Lean into the differences that make us unique and special. And because we know that, every time we come together and do this work in community, we are deepening and actualizing an image of the democracy that we're achieving together, right? We are literally engaging in non-cooperation because when the authoritarian is saying we want to create fear, we are saying no, we are literally modeling democracy by showing up because of how we do it. And so with that, I want to say thank you to everyone on tonight. Thank you so much to Jane, to Jody for having me. And please know that we are here as Interfaith Alliance to support however we can.
Adam, that was so wonderful. And I feel like you just wrapped up your piece with a blessing and a reminder for all of us. So thank you so much for that. Um, so I'm going to scoot us quickly into this next section because we are short on time. I'm going to start by putting, not that you went over, Adam, to be clear. I'm just acknowledging my own time limitations. um, I'm going to start by putting into the chat a link to a form where you can sign up for lots of particular ways to engage in this work. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hold on. So as you heard at the very beginning of this training, I'm the Reverend Dr. Jody Cohen Hayashida. I organize Multifaith Justice Maine under the auspices of the Maine People's Alliance. Multifaith Justice Maine has been developing an organizing plan to counter white Christian nationalism for about 2.5 years now. And we have been both experimenting with various forms of action and then modifying them as we learn what works and what doesn't. So I'm going to talk you all quickly through the basics of our campaign and the pieces of the work that we are taking up right now. You will recognize in the work that we are doing and we are planning a lot of what Adam shared in his presentation. And I want to name that for each piece of this work that you are invited to participate in, we will offer all of the training and support that you need. So in the form, you can check any of those boxes and don't assume we're just going to throw you into the deep end. So the overarching goal of our organizing campaign is to move people, power, resources, and moral authority from the white Christian nationalist movement and its support for white supremacy and authoritarianism, and into the embrace of an ever-growing, multi-faith, multiracial community that celebrates our diversity joyfully, is disciplined in our solidarity, and is equipped in the skills and practice of nonviolent civil resistance and civil disobedience. So that's kind of our overarching goal. We're hoping to undermine that faith pillar of support that Adam talked about, and instead strengthen that faith pillar as a form of collective support for democracy, and even deeper than that, solidarity and collective thriving. So there are a few ways that we are doing that. First, we grow our power through ongoing trainings. So we have been doing trainings for a while now about white Christian nationalism. So we will literally come to your church or your community of faith, walk you through this training, including what the work is. It started out just as me doing the trainings. Now we have a group of others who are also doing the training, and we really want to expand that circle of people who are equipped to go out into their communities. Because part of what we are aware of is that we only know who we know. And so every time we train more people, there are more of us who are able to look even further out into our communities and who may have connections with people in unexpected places who are now equipped to talk about this and offer these trainings in places that we couldn't go. So we really want to train as many of us as possible to offer these trainings, have these conversations. Part of that, we are aware, is that as we invite people to move away from white Christian nationalist beliefs, and perhaps even communities of faith that are grounded in white Christian nationalist beliefs, and into this beloved multi-faith community, there can be significant loss. We have probably heard, many of us, that most people don't change their minds because of facts. We change our minds because of feelings. And one of the most significant barriers to changing our minds at all is the way we balance what we might lose. And if we are going to lose our entire community, we collectively need to be sure that we are offering support, love, not judgment, a gentle way to move, and a very loving and tender embrace, a place for people to land. So that's another piece of our work. One of you asked about this in the chat. Another one of our goals is to equip multi-faith groups. And by multi-faith, I mean not only people from organized traditions, but people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious, people who don't practice at all, but believe strongly in the separation of church and state. We want to gather and equip people to hold in-district meetings with legislators. So those are small meetings of anywhere from 4 to 10 people with our state legislators, so senators or representatives, during which we can share our stories as people of faith, educate legislators on what white Christian nationalism is, because a lot of people don't know, right? Like, we might sense that something is wrong, but we're not sure what. So we give them language to address it. We offer an alternative, which is our collective vision of beloved multi-faith community and true freedom to practice. We hear the language of religious repression. You're repressing my right to practice freely, and what people actually mean is you're repressing my right to repress others. So shifting the understanding of what that means, and then asking them to pledge not to support any legislation that comes before them that is grounded in or supports white Christian nationalism. If we could achieve a 2/3 majority that would be huge. That's a veto-proof majority. We will reclaim the radically liberatory moral authority of all of our faith traditions by training to speak at school board meetings when questions of LGBTQ equality and justice come up, where book banning comes up. We see this showing up at school board meetings over and over and in increasing ways. We can equip you to show up in those spaces as a person of faith, offering a different vision. Same thing with town council meetings. Same thing with learning how to testify at the State House, writing letters to the editors, op-eds. Many of you are already doing some of this. For those of you who aren't, we would love to support you. We will hold public celebrations of beloved multi-faith community. Adam mentioned that we can't just focus on what's wrong and what's scary. We have to lift up what is beautiful and enlivening. Maine is an incredible place for at least part of the year outside, and we can gather collectively and really just show the power and the beauty of what it means to come together in this way. We will serve as poll chaplains at polling locations at the primaries in June and the midterms in November. Some of you did this with us already. We will train you to be a poll chaplain, which means showing up at local polling locations, ensuring that people feel safe voting, are able to vote safely. We can escort people in and also serve as a de-escalating presence. We will train and train others in nonviolent civil resistance and nonviolent civil disobedience. This is, as Adam mentioned, a deep part of our religious heritage. This is a moment that calls us to show up in every way possible. We are an important piece of this work, an important presence in these spaces, and there are skills and practices that we can learn together and then bring out to our communities. So I'm going to put in again into the chat the link to that form. So I would invite all of you to go take a look at the options on that form. You can check any of those boxes. You're not like promising us you're going to do the work. What we will do with that information is we will follow up with you. If you say you want to learn how to testify, we will let you know when we have those trainings scheduled. If you say you want to pull together a group for an in-district meeting, we'll reach out to you and support you in pulling together that group, training, and setting you up. So filling out the form just lets us know how to move you into these pieces of the work. I want to name that it is not the case everywhere, and it is incredible gift that we work in such close relationship with groups like the Maine Council of Churches, who have also been working so hard for so many years to educate the Maine community, mobilize people into this space, to have resources like Interfaith Alliance and Adam. This work is always important, but right now, in part in response, but not only in response to the hardness of this moment, our movement towards each other in love and hope and vulnerability and open-heartedness and a willingness to be uncomfortable in pieces of the work that we've never done, uncomfortable in challenging authority in ways that some of us were trained from birth not to do. We need each other to be able to not just show up once, but persist in that work. And it is a true gift to share this kind of space and these kind of relationships. So I will end there. Please fill out the form so we know how to reach out to you.
Thank you so much, Jody. And it is a privilege to work so closely with you right here in Maine, and then to have someone like Adam that you and I can pick up the phone and send an email and consult with. We couldn't do it without these kinds of connections. Jody and I have a lot of fun working together too. Somewhere way back in the chat, I dropped a link to a video on our YouTube channel that can give you a little baby step into legislative advocacy. It's a 34-minute video that you could watch before you went to a in-person training with Jody and Multifaith Justice Maine, if that made you comfortable. And we do an every other year faith-based advocacy training. This past 2025, we did town hall meetings, which was a little bit of a different format, but there will be lots of opportunities. And the more people doing this work and pulling together, the better. We have a couple of minutes left, and there was a question back in the chat that I can answer really quickly about the state legislature. Sort of. I'm answering it in a tangent. The legislative session is a short year this year, so it's winding up pretty quickly. But the thing that a lot of us in the faith community are setting our sights toward is trying to defeat the anti-trans referendum that will come up on the November ballot. And so we are part of a working group that has a ballot question committee to work on that. And you'll be hearing more and more about that. I saw Reverend Dr. Marvin Ellison is here tonight, and he's helping with the theological messaging piece of how that work will unfold in the months ahead, but keep an eye out for that. Adam, I saw a question come up that maybe we'll throw to you in the minutes we have left here. Is it possible that white Christian nationalism is being used as a tool to achieve the authoritarian end? How would you answer that?
That is a great question, and I would say not only is it possible, it is definitely happening. Um, I won't be too long-winded about this, but I just want to lift up one important example from just this week, the State of the Union on Tuesday, where afterwards multiple cabinet members tweeted out a picture of the entire cabinet with their hands on President Trump praying. Right now, it's every American's right or person who lives on this land's right to express their faith freely. It is different when folks are invoking religion to say that somebody's political actions are divinely ordained, which is the message that folks are conveying when they say we are using the power of God to build up the president before he gives a political speech, right? We saw similar pictures before his inauguration of clergy around the country coming together to pray. And even on the campaign trail in 2024, there were clergy from the New Apostolic Reformation traveling around the country, baptizing people in the name of MAGA, right? Directly drawing that line. So the simple answer is yes.
Thank you for that horrifying image. Sometimes I wonder, I think Adam needs to do a brain wash after having to expose yourself to this really toxic stuff. It's horrifying. Jody, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I also just want to name, because we didn't get into this too much here. We're also seeing it show up in really dangerous ways in the military, with top military leadership bringing in the leaders of the white Christian nationalist movement, expecting people to adhere to those beliefs and practices. And it's a bit of an expansion on what Adam mentioned. When you have the most powerful military in the world being told that their civilian leadership is divinely ordained by God, then withdrawing consent and support from that military pillar of support means it's not just a moral choice, it's a sin. And that is a terrifying thing to think about. Like not just a sin the way you might talk about it, but like a sin like you're going to go to hell. So that's something to pay very close attention to.
Wow.
And not to add more horribleness, but if I could add one more quick thing, and I know we could do this all night, but our work, I know this can feel really big, and we're giving examples that are very salient and visible at the federal level. I just want to affirm that, we have work to do federally, and like this is playing out on our school boards, right? When
Mm-hmm.
somebody says that, trans kids are an abomination, an affront to God, they are invoking religion and claiming some sort of divine or moral authority in literally telling children that they don't matter, who they are isn't right. And that is also a manifestation of Christian nationalism translating into policy objectives.
Absolutely. We just have, and I'm going to, this is silly for me to even say, but briefly, in a sentence or two, could each of you respond to this question? Um, Briefly underscore why it's of particular importance that we, as members of a faith community, are part of those objecting to white Christian nationalism. Why is it so important that people of faith are the ones objecting? Quick thoughts, and then we'll move to closing.
Uh, I think that because so much of what we are hearing, even though we know it's actually a political and social movement cloaked in the language and imagery of religion, um, it has to be other people of faith in large part who are speaking up and reclaiming that moral authority and reclaiming that imagery and reclaiming that grounding and offering competing and I would describe it as more faithful um, grounding in all of our traditions. It
Well
has to be
said.
us because it is also us.
Hmm. Adam?
That is 100% right. And so briefly, two quick additions to that. I'll say one as a Jewish person, um, I just want to name that for the many Christian folks on this call, it is especially you have a uniquely powerful voice in confronting white Christian nationalism for that same reason. Just as people of faith broadly, we can contest abuses of faith. As Christians, you have a unique role in saying that is not my Christianity.
Yep.
And there's a huge educational element to this, right? The majority of Americans who are majority religious, all the stats show are on the team of democracy, are against white Christian nationalism. But I think the perception of most Americans is that religion, Christianity, is, more in the white Christian nationalist camp than not.
Yes.
And we set the record straight by contesting that too.
Exactly. Yes. And I'll close by offering this, that the Maine Council of Churches went through a discernment process about 5 or 6 years ago as to whether we should become an interfaith organization and not ecumenical, in other words, grounded in Hebrew and Christian scripture. And our interfaith siblings, particularly from the Jewish community, said, "Don't you dare. We need you to stay Christian ish. We're Christian adjacent because we have the UUs and the Quakers at our table, which I love, and they were founding denominations of our council, which is very rare in state ecumenical councils. But 5 of our 7 are Christian, and our Jewish siblings said, "You need to stay where you are because you need to have our backs when other quote unquote Christians say what they say." I want to thank Adam. You all can use those little reactions that can show how much gratitude you have and uh, thankfulness you have. I know you share it with me for all that he gave us tonight. And for Jody bringing it to the local level so that you have somewhere to go after tonight, so that there are actionable steps right here in the state of Maine. We are so grateful to the both of you. How lucky we are to have you on our team. I love the way Adam has used the phrase team a lot tonight. I am going to share my screen as we close tonight. Big announcement, so don't leave yet. Are you all seeing a blue screen now? Great. My 29-year-old gave me 2 screens, and I am technologically an idiot, so I'm never sure what's happening here. I'd like to thank Megan Akers, who is the office administrator and social media coordinator for Maine Council of Churches. She provided all the administrative and tech support for this training. And I'd like to thank all of you who were here tonight, who came, who participated, and who made financial contributions to make it possible. Thank you. In a day or two, or maybe sometime next week, because the weekend's coming, you will all receive an email with the link to the recording. And I will do my very best to try to collect all the info and resources that were shared tonight and put live links into that email for those as well. And we look forward to staying in touch with you through our e-news that will be coming out during Lent weekly, but usually is once or twice a month. Because you signed up for this, we know how to find you now, and we will send those to you. You can always unsubscribe if you don't want to keep getting them. There will be a series of community plate potluck suppers and storytelling focused on the immigrant experience in Maine, being held in Holton, Bridgeton, and Blue Hill in the coming months. We got a grant with Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition to host those. Keep an eye out. And then this is the big announcement. Almost nobody, and I thought Adam was going to blow it because he started to talk about it and nobody knows yet that this fall, the Maine Council of Churches is very proud and honored to say that the keynote speaker at our annual fundraising event will be Bishop Buddy. She is coming to Maine to speak to us. And you will have an opportunity to come and hear her in person. And I'm just so excited and very, very grateful to our Episcopal Bishop, Thomas Brown, who made that happen. We are so grateful. So keep an eye out. We do not have a date yet, but we will be letting you know as more details become available. And we really hope you'll be able to join us. So as we close tonight, I offer words of benediction, inviting you to go in peace from this place, knowing that our hearts are grateful for you being here and for you caring so deeply about preserving our democracy and standing up for justice, compassion, and peace. Go in peace, my friends.
We rise, humbly-hearted rise, won't be divided, rise, with spirit to guide us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise. All of the children rise, elders with wisdom rise, ancestors surround us, rise, in hope, in prayer.